The M1 MacBook Air has risen to be one of the most desirable laptops produced by Apple. After years of mediocre CPU performance by its Intel CPU counterparts, the tides have finally shifted back in the M1's favor. Now, it's 2022, the M1 was released in 2020. Is this laptop still worth buying? Stick around for a comprehensive review of the 2020 M1 MacBook Air, but to save you guys some time, I'm going to say it absolutely is worth purchasing. The M1 MacBook Air is still an excellent option, regardless of the speculation of future iterations of the M chip in its MacBook Airs. From light users from students or to power content creators like YouTubers or video editors or photographers, the M1 is an excellent option and offers so much. My name is Manny and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we're going to go over a comprehensive review of the MacBook Air to see exactly what this powerhouse has to offer. But before we jump into the review, let's track back a few years into history and see what the M1 chip is all about. Also guys, if you haven't already done so, don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. Your views and your subscriptions help propel this channel up, and I appreciate all the help that I've gotten thus far, so big up to you guys. On November 10th, 2020, Apple shocked the world by announcing their brand new in-house chip made specifically for the Mac lineup, the first of its kind. The M1 chip was introduced as an SoC, also known as a system on a chip. So what is so different about the M1 chip compared to its previous Intel processors? Well, the main difference is the ARM-based architecture. Essentially, ARM processors require fewer instructions, which in essence require fewer transistors to handle computing tasks. The M1 chip is an 8-core chip with 4 high-performance cores and 4 high-efficiency cores. Like the name suggests, high-performance cores are dedicated and utilized with CPU-intensive applications. Likewise, for tasks that aren't as demanding, the efficiency cores are utilized. This means that the M1 chip will use the lowest possible power drawing cores to complete whatever tasks it's working on. Now at the time this video is being recorded in March of 2022, Apple has already released a new set of M processors, the M1 Ultra and the M1 Max for its new lineup. Now that being said, there have been no new iterations for the MacBook Air. So with all that being said, is the M1 MacBook Air from 2020 still a worthy purchase? So let's begin things by talking about the dimensions and weight of the MacBook Air. The MacBook Air only weighs 1.29 kilograms and is one of the lightest laptops I've ever held. It's a unibody design made out of aluminum and has absolutely no flex to the chassis whatsoever, so don't let the lightweight design of the MacBook Air fool you. The MacBook Air is only 1.61 centimeters tall at its tallest point when shut and only 0.41 centimeters at its taper. It's about 1 foot wide and only 8.3 inches in depth. The MacBook Air has a 13.3-inch LED backlit IPS display with a resolution of 2560 by 1600 pixels. The pixel density is 227 pixels per inch, meaning that individual pixels are almost impossible to distinguish, and the display is extremely crisp. The MacBook Air goes up to 400 nits in brightness, plenty of light for any indoor environment, even with glare, and you can probably get away with working in super bright conditions outside under the sun. The Air is equipped with True Tone display, meaning the brightness will automatically adjust to the environment around you. The display will dim down when working in low light conditions and automatically jump up in brighter settings. This can be disabled in the settings if you're not used to it, but I always use this feature. Now let's move on to the keyboard. A few years ago, Apple came under fierce criticism when they ditched their scissor mechanism into a super low travel butterfly mechanism keyboard. Users were left with sore fingers and hands hurting from the shallow keystrokes, and not only that, the mere design of the butterfly mechanism meant that dirt and debris would get stuck inside the keys, which would render it useless pretty quickly. However, this is no longer the case in the new M1 MacBook, as they reverted back to the true intestine scissor mechanism. Typing is an absolute dream, and I've gone hours of typing without any issues at all. There's no touch bar on the Air, but that's a pretty polarizing topic in itself. Some people love it and some people absolutely hate it. Moving on to the trackpad, and this is where Apple truly separates itself from the pack. The Force Touch trackpad is an absolute joy to use. It supports force clicking, pressure sensitivity drawing, and multi-fingered and hand gestures when you're utilizing shortcuts. Pinch to zoom and scroll are all still an absolute dream, and they work almost identical to the iPhone and iPad. Another new feature implemented into the MacBook Air is the biometric fingerprint reader, or Apple's Touch ID. Just like on some iPhone and iPads, you can unlock your MacBook and use Apple Pay by using the secure Touch ID feature. Moving on to the speakers of the MacBook Air, and it's equipped with 2 speakers on the left and right side of the keyboard, packing a strong punch with its bass and very crisp high notes. Now, it's almost surprising how much fidelity and speaker quality you get out of such a compact device. I would demonstrate the audio quality of the speakers, but since I'm not recording this video with the studio grade microphone, the audio demonstration just wouldn't do it justice. Just taken from me, the speakers are very good on this MacBook. Now moving on to the webcam, and this is by far the biggest weakness of the MacBook Air. It's still only equipped with a 720p, or what Apple like to call its FaceTime camera, but let's be honest here, it's 2022, we should have at least full HD cameras, and it just falls far below. I mean, I'm gonna provide you with a video example, and I'll let you be the judge, but I'm absolutely not a fan of it. Alright guys, so this is a quick idea of how the webcam looks. This is the FaceTime 720p, 2022 Apple, come on, at least 1080p would be great. But I'll let you guys be the judge if this is acceptable or not. I think it's not up to par, but I think the audio sounds quite great with the 3-array microphone set up here. I'm not sure if you can hear any ambient noise in the background. I got the UFC on, but this is the webcam. Now moving on to the ports, the MacBook takes a simplistic approach to things with only 2 Lightning USB-C connectors on the left side and a single microphone head jack on the right side. It would have been nice to have another Lightning connector on the right side, but I guess you can't have everything. I personally use the USB dongle that extends me further inputs, and it is a cheap solution to a somewhat frustrating downside. Now moving on to the battery life, and this is where the M1 MacBook truly shines. Remember that ARM processor, and we were talking about it earlier in the introduction? Well, it cuts down the instruction time and the number of instructions required to compute, and in essence, it uses less resources, meaning higher battery life. Now, Apple claims that there's 15 to 18 hours on a single charge, and I'm going to say that those numbers are inflated and very carefully tailored to maximize the battery readings. When Apple does these tests, they run simple applications and just run those applications for a prolonged period of time to give you those numbers. In real world scenarios, variables such as brightness, volume, Bluetooth, internet, and application specific usage is going to affect your battery life. In my experience, I've been able to get 7 to 9 hours of battery off a single charge using light applications like Chrome, Safari, Microsoft Excel, and some basic coding. Now, when I go into heavier applications like Lightroom and Premiere Pro, the battery life drops down to around 3 to 4 hours, which is still phenomenal considering it's using the CPU and GPU processing powers, and many Windows-based laptops, the battery dies within a couple of hours. Overall, if you're planning on using the MacBook for power-intensive applications, this thing can completely handle them obviously, but it can also ensure that your battery doesn't shut off and your computer doesn't die while using it. Also, the 30-watt power brick is very sleek, and the battery life actually charges and reaches 80% with just another hour of charging. So let's talk about performance, and this is where this MacBook really shines. Now, just to reiterate before I begin, I'm gonna lay out the specs of my MacBook. It's a 2020 MacBook Air with 16GB of unified memory and a 512 SSD. Now, to put into perspective, any application that I've been able to use with my Windows PC, if that application is available on the MacBook or the Mac OS, I've been able to use that and get the same performance. And that's absolutely insane considering this is such a compact device. Now, giving you word of mouth and saying how this thing is great is one thing, but to normalize these results and really compare between a powerhouse PC and the MacBook, I use Geekbench 5 to benchmark my results. A quick recap of my Windows PC, it's equipped with the Ryzen 7 3700X processor with 16GB of DDR4 memory and an RTX 2060 8GB video card. With the Geekbench test, my desktop scored 1,309 in a single core performance and 8,552 in the multi-core performance. Now with the same test running on my MacBook Air, the Geekbench resulted in a single score of 1,745 and a multi-core score of 7,713. Now this is just absolutely insane. In single-threaded and single-core performance, the MacBook Air actually outperforms the Ryzen 7 CPU. Like, this is just mind-blowing stuff. And if these results couldn't get any crazier, to put into perspective, the MacBook was able to beat on the single core and almost on the multi-core a 27-inch Mac with an i7 from 2019 that cost well over $3,000. So that just puts into perspective how far in performance and technology the M1 ARM processor has come. And one of the craziest things about all of this is that these tests were run without a power source into the MacBook. The MacBook Air was not plugged in when running these tests. This was a standalone test. That is crazy considering a lot of Windows PCs reduce performance when a power source is not plugged in. So this means that whether the power brick is plugged into the MacBook Air or not, you're always going to get the same maximum performance out of the MacBook. That is very critical, and a lot of tech review channels and reviews of the M1 don't capitalize that point. That is very critical. So whether or not you have a charger or not, you're going to get the same performance no matter what. And guess what? This keeps getting better. If you notice, my Ryzen 7 has an aftermarket active cooling fan on the processor. The MacBook Air has no active cooling at all. Everything is done passively through thermal conducting. That means that this MacBook makes absolutely no noise. You don't have to worry about fans winding up when it's under full load, and there's no thermal throttling at all. This MacBook has not overheated on me at once and has never resulted in an application closing on me. Just absolutely mind-blowing efficiency from the M1. Now this is a good segue into talking about how much RAM you should get in your MacBook, whether it should be 8 GB or 16 GB. Now, we've determined that the M1 processor is extremely capable and very efficient when utilizing its resources. However, efficiency is no substitute from hardware. And the unfortunate thing is that applications are demanding more memory as time passes, and eventually a lot of tasks where you could get away with 8 GB of RAM will eventually need 16 GB to keep all the resources fed properly, so to say. The M1 processor for light computing, so I'm talking about basic stuff like Microsoft Office, Google Sheets, Chrome, Safari, 8 GB is more than enough. However, if you're planning on doing resource-intensive applications like Lightroom, Photoshop, Premiere Pro, or even AutoCAD, I would highly recommend the 16 GB of RAM. If you don't, unfortunately, what's going to end up happening is if you multitask or you try running multiple tasks with an intensive application like one of those as I mentioned, you are going to go into performance throttling. 16 GB not only ensures that the programs run efficiently and effectively, it also future-proofs your MacBook, and you probably won't have to upgrade as soon. So let's talk about the cost of the MacBook Air. I'll be referring to all the costs in Canadian dollars, but I'll have the US equivalency on the screen for reference. With Apple's current educational pricing, and let's be honest, I don't know why people wouldn't take advantage of this because they don't do a background check or ask for any proof. The baseline MacBook Air with 256 GB SSD and 8 GB of RAM is listed at $1,169.99. Now, if you spend an additional $250, you can upgrade the RAM to 16 GB, or for another $250, you can upgrade to an extra 256 GB of storage. You will realize that the base price of the laptop quickly shoots up as you start adding more and more things to it. Now, my recommendation is that you purchase the MacBook Air with the 256 GB SSD, but spend the extra $250 and get that 16 GB of RAM. The reason why I say is that this RAM cannot be upgraded after it's manufactured. Everything is soldered and built into the M1 chip as mentioned previously. Now, storage, you can purchase external storage at any point, and to be honest with you, Apple storage pricing is almost daylight robbery. $250 for an extra 256 GB is just mind-blowing. This 16 GB will ensure that you future-proof your MacBook and make sure that you never end up bottlenecking your laptop when more intensive applications are made for the M1 line of processing. So in conclusion, I absolutely recommend the M1 MacBook Air. Regardless of what the future speculation of the future iterations of the M processor in the MacBook Air lineups are, it's a fact that the M1 can handle everything that's thrown at it, and it's a more than capable device for light users or power-heavy content creators. Thanks for watching the video, and until next time, peace.